The Headless Venus, where passion meets form. I'm Kathleen Wiley, a Jungian psychoanalyst, and I am here with Deborah Henson-Conant, a composer, artist, creative mentor. We both play the harp, and that's why we call this Jung at Harp. Every or almost every week, Deborah and I come together with a question to have a conversation that we invite you to join in with if you're viewing live on one of the platforms where you can post a question and we hopefully see it or a comment or afterwards, wherever you find this. And we are happy to hear your comments and respond to that. So we don't have answers, but we have questions. And in the process, often of exploring our questions together, we do come up with some meaningful answers for where we are and hopefully for you. So, Deborah, would you like to share why we're talking about the Headless Venus?
Yeah, and
Uh,
I don't even know that, when you said, we have questions, and I was thinking, I don't even know exactly what this question is. But
mhm.
it goes, I've had an episode that happened in my life many, many years ago that's always stayed with me. And I knew that it had significance, but I didn't always know what that significance was. And I would look at it from time to time to see what it was. So when I was about 10 or 11 or 12, there was a project due at school. And this was probably one of the first times there was a project due, and it was the last minute, and I was trying to figure out what to do. I wasn't sure what to do, and then it was about ancient, I don't know, Rome, Greece, stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
And then I remembered that on our piano there it was a Venus, a statue of Venus, and I knew that that came from that era. And so I thought, well, I'll make my own statue. So I got some clay and I made the head, and the head was beautiful, and I put it aside, and then I worked on the rest of the body, and I'm feverishly like, it's due tomorrow. I finally got the body done, and I went to look for the head. It was nowhere. I finally realized I'd sat on it, and I was going to have to
Oh,
submit
no.
the Headless Venus. And I was just ashamed, but what could I do? So I submitted the Headless Venus, and I walk in and I see everybody else's projects. There's an erupting Mount Vesuvius, and there's the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And I know that I would
Oh.
ask that, I knew that other kids' parents worked on them with this, and I had been completely alone working on mine. And I was just like, oh, felt so ashamed. And then I got an A. And I didn't know what to make of that. And by the way, I have to put this in context that
Mm.
I moved every year as a child. So I was in a different school every year. So there was something about that, just in the terms that every year was a new place. So it's not like I had context for this. And so I've thought about this many times. And at first I was ashamed, like, what was wrong with that teacher? Why did she give me an A? And then I started to think, well, why did I, well, maybe she saw that I was an artist, or maybe she appreciated that I was doing something that was self-expressed. But this morning, I suddenly, as I was scrambling to finish a project, I thought, oh, maybe why this was so significant in my life is taking that idea of doing something at the last minute, getting things wrong, sitting on part of it, destroying part of it, and that's the way to do it successfully. And so what
Mm.
I was, so I and I was thinking, what a terrible, what a stress-inducing thing to create, an idea to create in your life out of that story. And then we started talking about it, and thinking about the golden cage again, and our perceptions and how we get locked in our perceptions. And so then you, the Jungian analyst, took it into that realm. So
Yeah.
help.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, part of what I was struck by in your story is how this experience of kind of being at the last minute, having to do the project, coming up with an idea, having to do it all on your own, then realizing as your time was running out, you'd set on the head, but there wasn't time to create a new head and you were going to have to turn it in. And that set in motion for you, it's a pattern, it sounds like, of kind of waiting till the last minute and scrambling to get things done. And perhaps also this idea that the only way you could present it was if it was headless, that there had to be something missing. There had to be something that you felt a little embarrassed about with it. That's an interesting thought, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I do think that
Yeah.
for something to have artistic value, there does have to be something embarrassing about it. There's no point in
Uh-huh.
creating something that is, I mean, a tiny little story. When I improvise, I'm not playing what I hear in my head. I'm playing shapes and feelings,
Mm-hmm.
but at one point I thought, if only I could play what's actually in my head, if I had that facility, it would be so great. And one day for some reason, I created a solo and I was recording and it was exactly what I had in my head. And I was like, well, the moment has happened. And I went to listen to it and it was just so not interesting, so not on the
Mm.
edge. It was completely missing that edge. And as I'm saying this, I'm thinking that, as artists, we're creating, but in a sense, we're in collaboration with, that's not in collaboration with what we can't do, but it's like, who wants to see what we can do? Then you're just presenting or reciting. What's fascinating is watching somebody finding their way or finding self-expression through the headless Venus, like, meaning the thing that it's not the way you thought it was supposed to be. And in every project of my life, it's never been the way I thought it was supposed to be, and it never is completed at the, like, and I hear people in the academy, there are people, they go out to create project and they're like, well, it's going to be like this, and then I'm going to have this, and then this, and this. But eventually they have to make choices, and those choices based on who they actually are right now, those are the choices that make it fascinating and beautiful and something
But I
that you
think,
would want to see.
yeah, I mean, I think what you're talking about is that somewhere the idea, and for those people, the idea stays malleable so that it's alive. It doesn't become something that's set in stone that begins to not have any movement or
Mhm,
fluidity, so
mhm.
that it's able to change according to the moment in time and the felt sense of the person in time.
Which is why I love teaching principles and
Yeah.
structures and concepts, because they are malleable. They open
Yeah.
up anything.
Yeah, and in terms of how we live our life, the more malleable we are, and that's true to ourselves, that's true to our own values and our own felt experience, the more resilient we are, the more adaptive we are, and the more able we are to embody our fullness and move towards our heart's desires. When we get caught in structures that becomes stone. I mean, that was part of what I was hearing you talk about, and what your realization this morning is.
Mhm.
You realize you kind of got caught in a pattern that really isn't the truth, but that out of that experience and the embarrassment you felt,
Mhm.
and perhaps the sense of the anxiety and the scrambling and the being
Right.
alone you felt, you
Mhm.
ended up kind of getting caught in your own cage, your own structure that didn't have any way out. And in truth, passion needs structure, but it needs structure that is like wax, that can
Mhm.
melt as it's needed and reform and take a new shape. So in improv, there is a structure, as I understand, as you teach it, as what's coming to my
Mhm.
mind, is the harmonic progression becomes like the structure, and then you
That's
can
one
work around
structure,
it.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's one structure, and there's
yeah,
motifs, there's all kinds of different ways you can create or connect to structure.
yeah.
Well,
But there has to be a way. But that
yeah, well,
structure then has to allow the fluidity.
right. So what I'm interested in is that, or what we were talking about ahead of time was, um, what my little brain took from this was that the meaningful structure there was get into anxiety, be alone, and
Mhm.
create in that environment. And for someone who struggles with addictive perfectionism, that actually is a great formula. It's not a great formula to be a happy person, but it's a great formula to be able to create work that has has an edge to
Right.
it.
Well, yeah, well, now you're into the whole reason we stay caught in those structures is because they all do have some benefit for our life. I mean, these kinds of structures come into place because they give us something we need. The problem is when it becomes so solid of a structure, it
Mm,
keeps out other structures we need. Like to what you said, I went to harmonic progression, and you said, well, that's one structure. There are
right.
others. So
Yeah.
there's got to be, when that structure with the benefit and how it
Mhm.
served you becomes the only thing that matters, it keeps out other possibilities that you also need to live your life fully, or we need to express ourselves on our instrument.
What part of what's interesting to me about this that you brought out when we were talking ahead of time was, okay, so this incident has been significant all my life. I knew it was significant. It had sense of
Mhm.
significance. And I wasn't clear what that significance was. Was it that I was ashamed that the teacher shouldn't have given me an A because I didn't deserve it? Was it, what was it? So all these years I'm looking at the significance, but never did I turn and look at the significance of the conditions under which I created it
Oh,
and
mhm.
what that put into my life. And it reminds me of the moment on the harp right before I
Yeah.
started creating Baroque flamenco, where I had this moment of epiphany where I was like, and I had a big concert harp where I was like, wait a minute, there's all these strings, but then there's this huge soundboard that we identify as not being the instrument. Is just a thing that
Mhm.
needs to be there in order for the instrument to be there. What if that too could be played as if it were the instrument?
Mhm.
But it was that same kind of moment where my blindness was so multidimensional, that I didn't even see this whole other aspect of what I'm caught in.
Yeah, isn't that also kind of like the headless Venus? You don't have the mind to really be able to see what is because it's like being on autopilot, which the body
Mm,
goes on autopilot. I mean, that's what allows us. I mean,
mm.
our breathing, our digestion. There's so much on autopilot for both of us right now, so we can actually come together and use energy to think. We don't have to worry about
Now,
breathing.
wait a minute here. Wait a minute here, Miss Embodiment Practices. Are you saying, I mean, I read a book once that was called, I don't know what it was called, whatever. But it was the first time I'd heard of the mind being not just, it's not here, the
Right, that's
mind
right.
being the entire. Okay, but I think what I'm hearing you say, what I really just heard you say right now is, yeah, the body has all these automatic processes. It's essential. We couldn't function without them.
Right.
And now I'm thinking that the headless Venus is saying like, oh, here's another one. Let's do this one. This is going to be an automatic process. This is going to work, and puts it into the hopper.
Well, it's funny because I, as I've been doing the embodiment circle and working on this book project that actually gave rise to the embodiment circle, um, someone who does a lot of editing for me keeps says, how would you define body mind? And this is someone who does a lot of somatic work herself. And so I said, well, what are the definitions out there for body mind? And she was really surprised. There aren't a whole lot. So yeah, you'd think there were. So this is how I'm going to explain it. I think that the body and mind, and this is what Jung says, are different expressions of the same transcendental being. And that there is no body without the mind, and there's no mind without the body. And that the transcendental being is, for me, the divine essence in us. It is that spark of the divine, whatever that means to you in your framework of belief, that embodies it becomes it spreads
Oh,
out to shape who you are. And so we need both, and we need to recognize the value of each. You're talking about something that your body mind
Mhm.
at 10, 11, or 12, whenever that project happened, had both ideas about it that came
Mm.
from the head, but the ideas in the mind were tied to these body experiences of embarrassment, of anxiety,
Right.
of aloneness, of confusion, of shame. They go together. So there's nothing that happens in the body that we see physically that isn't also having some expression in the mind. And we tend to associate the mind with just the head, but it really isn't. I mean,
Mm,
it's
mm,
all of the
mhm,
intelligence. It's
mhm.
like it's holographic. It's the only way I know how to talk about it. And we are talking about something that is still very much a mystery. I mean, science is always uncovering new things about how we
Mm,
work.
right.
Yeah.
So there are a couple things are coming out to me. So I'm going to ask you what transcendental actually means in a second.
Okay.
But I'm also thinking that I noticed when you said, this feeling with the headless Venus of, not of shame, blah, 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 blah. And as you were describing all these feelings, I was like, well, that's really interesting because every one of them, for a child who's constantly moving every year and is alone a lot, um, is an experience of actually what it's like to be with other people
Hmm.
versus completely alone. I mean, every one of them
Hmm.
had to do with something. It's occurring to me that also, as I'm saying this, I can actually feel sort of something in my stomach, that yeah, that equating those feelings. What did you say? I mean, we can go back and listen, but not
Yeah.
now. Shame. Um, uh, I can't remember what they all were, but I was like,
Right.
okay, interesting. So those um, anxiety, at least they're feelings and not a sense of absolute isolation and uh, beyond isolation. And then I was also thinking that when you said, we sort of learn that this situation might bring this creative thing, I realized my experience wasn't so much that I learned something as that I took on a way of being.
Right. That's right. That's right, because learning implies cognition, which
Right,
implies some level of self awareness and
right,
conscious reflection.
right.
And as children, when we're in those early developmental stages, as well as all throughout our life, the processes of how we develop are not cognitive. I mean,
Right.
cognition is one of the processes that gets developed. But this is a little bit, I think, of what we're trying to get at with where passion
Mhm,
meets form.
mhm,
And in the strings of passions, where you go from the first string is impulse and the second string is structure,
mhm,
is that we need that capacity for self reflection and self awareness about these forms and these structures that just are automatically there. And that
mhm, mhm,
somehow it's when those two
mm,
things begin to inform each other. So, your awareness this morning brought with it, because of who you are now and all you have consciously available. Maybe I don't have to wait till the last minute.
mhm,
Maybe I don't have to always be scrambling and anxious. And maybe I don't have to do things alone anymore. Now
mm,
maybe that didn't all go through your head,
mhm,
but something shifted and it was like, oh, this is just one way of moving towards creative projects. The other thing you've said that I think is really important is that this way of being, of working on your own, has been great for you in many, many ways. I mean, it has really suited your temperament and your life's passion for creating artistically and wanting to share things on the edge. So it's not that you are going to let go of that. It's just you don't want that to be the only option. You don't want
mhm.
that to
Right.
be, you want it really like the at the end of the golden cage. It's almost, this isn't spelled out, but my what I take from it is that the golden cage is really the cage that we can come and go from. That when we
Mm-hmm.
need to go into it to have that sense of safety and containment and familiarity and the beauty reflects to us, we go in it. But when we need to explore and expand and discover, we go out. And that there is a fluidity. It's not that one state's better than the other, but where it becomes the stone of concrete and iron and the prison is when it's the only option. And again, those kinds of things get set in place in our psyche and how we move with ourselves through the world all the time. And we don't know it until we know it.
Yeah, and you just so much in what you just said. I mean, even when you said one's not better than the other, and I was thinking, right, there's good, better, best, which just okay, good, many options, better, fewer options, best, one option, one thing. That's it.
Uh-huh.
The God, there's so much that's coming in here. How we start containing ourselves in the it must only be this way, how that happens in us. And I'm really getting an insight into that this morning, that it does not happen through our minds. It happens through this way of being, this just shift in a way of being, which is maybe, I don't know if it's an instinct, I really don't know what it is. I don't know if it has anything to do with how chameleons feel when they change color, which was something I was thinking about the other day. But I do, and I don't know if we'll have time to talk about this today, but as we were speaking about this, I was thinking you were talking about how we build a cage of cement and iron, which is what the golden cage is all about. And I was thinking, well, I started having that story came into my mind at 19. And I always felt that the story was trying to tell me something. It was trying to help me out of my own cage. And I sense that everything we create is trying, it almost like they all have a life of their own, and they're trying. Like, I'm thinking about the Nightingale, which I didn't want to perform because it didn't have, it wasn't impressive, and I finally learned to perform it. But until this moment, I didn't think it has something to tell me about myself
Right.
and how to show up in the world and how to be. Everything we create can show us how to be, unless we're trying to perfect it. And then it starts to open down.
Yeah, I mean, and Jung says every man's theory is a self-confession. So everything we create, everything we do, everything we say is an expression of something inside of us. And, for the artist, I do think, but I think it's true for all of us and everything, if we encounter ourselves and what we put into the outer world.
It's also reminding me of, I'm working with an artist on developing her first show, and it's just getting more and more complex. And I said, okay, so here's the deal. You're going to go through the show and you're going to highlight everything that's difficult or that's stopping you and that's blocking you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to either find an easy way to do that, like immediately, like tomorrow, or we're taking it out.
Okay.
And then after I told her that, I thought, hello, are you going to do that in your own life? What would that look like? Because I observe in myself and others that we have a creative idea, and then the first thing we do is try to hide it by making it look like everybody else's thing looks.
Yeah, we try to hide it by making it, and we try, yeah. And we start thinking it alone is not good enough, that standing alone with it is not good enough. And, part of what you said about the good, the better, the best, I had two thoughts about that. What's best in one situation is only what's good in another. I mean, I think we have to kind of get it that there's always this fluidity. So what is the one way forward in one situation may not be the one way forward in the next. It may only be a good situation. So I think that fluidity that we have to engage with is important. That we want to stay fluid. We want malleable forms and structures. Yeah. I'm
We're
going to
getting
let you pull those up.
wonderful. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just show some of these. So Susan's saying we have to keep our options and our minds open throughout our lives. Age is not a cage. It can be an opportunity. Wow. Okay. So, right. Everything that we are experiencing as a cage. Wow. This is so beautiful. And
Yeah.
Victoria is saying everything we create is showing us how to be.
Yes.
I resonate with that. Sometimes it is hard to share something I create because I don't want to be judged by others on how I choose to be. Yeah.
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 That's so
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. And so from a psychological perspective, when judgment of other people shuts us down, it's
Mhm.
important to look for the part of us that unconsciously is agreeing with them.
Mm.
Because it doesn't it may have a sting,
Mhm.
but it doesn't shut us down unless some part of us really agrees with it and buys into it. And often that is something unconscious, like this pattern you've shared this morning,
Yeah.
DHC, around the
Yeah.
headless Venus.
Mm.
And so in that way, the even when we encounter that in the outside world, it does become an opportunity. It becomes an opportunity to know ourselves, because it's like, okay, so here's my judgment, and coming back at me, and I'm not conscious of it. I had in this book project that I'm doing, someone who's helping me, who's been a great aid, said to me at one point, "Well, I wouldn't read this." And it really took me back. I mean, it just really, and I also had someone say to me that no one in a particular category of readers would want to read my book, and that again took me back. So I finally got to a place in the last month. I thought, well, gosh, it's far better that they're saying this to me now, while I can deal with it before the book is actually out there in black and white form. So I can deal with my own self doubt, my own dismissal, my own, oh, well, that doesn't fit for those people now, because there are all kinds of responses in the outside world. And this again comes back, and I love the response your teacher gave you with the Headless Venus. She saw what mattered most, and she affirmed your essence in that. And this is, I believe, a part of what we have to do for ourselves to not get caught in the cages.
Well, I'm just about to cry because I completely missed that part of the whole significance in that,
Mm,
um, that's what is so important for me in the
right.
work that I do, especially when I'm coaching other
Yes.
musicians. That's the foundation, what you just said. And I missed until this moment that
Mhm.
that 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 may have been why I held on to this my whole life,
Yeah.
for that significance of actually having been seen.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And having it be so precious, and the fear of it not happening again being so great that I even hid. I'm thinking,
Mhm.
that I didn't even see that was the beauty, and that was, that has it forged me. And not forged, but I mean, given me that energy. It's like a lighter, like something pulling me onward.
Yeah.
That idea of looking for that fundamental essence of what you are seeing now in this thing exactly the way it is, and not the way it's supposed to be or should be, but
Right.
actually seeing that.
Yes. Yes. And I think when you talk about creating on the edge, what you're really saying is those are the moments where you're in touch with your essence. Because when we're in touch with our essence, we're starting to learn something and see and experience ourselves in a new way in that moment. And hopefully we do that every day of our life. And I think this again is where things like age then really are an opportunity. It's just, this is just happens to be the place I am now. And how is it my essence is expressing and wants expression now?
Mm. I know we need to leave, and
Yeah.
I'm just gonna pull this up. And Victoria is saying, having a safe place to share what I'm working on, and get meaningful feedback is one of the best ways for me to create and continue to evolve,
Yeah.
which is the space I'm trying to create always. My golden cage is also my safe space with trusted people who I can share my half-baked ideas with. Those are, oh my God, Victoria, that's, yes, yes,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful place. Um, I wish we could keep talking for hours. I mean, we will, but
Right.
space-based. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Susan, and everybody else who's watched this and participated silently or in text. Just thank you for this conversation. And Kathleen, oh my God, thank you for this ongoing conversation. I'm just
Mhm.
so grateful that you decided to host me for an event years ago and that we had that conversation in that car and that is continued.
I
And
am
thank
too.
you so much. I can't wait to talk again next week.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.